Hey students, we're going to be talking about the modern banking system, why are banks important, how do they use money, and how do they create money. The creation of our national banking system is a roller coaster of a ride. Under the US Constitution, Congress had the power to coin money and forbid the states to do so. But the federal government would not print any money until the Civil War. State charter banks were allowed to print their own money so long as they tied it to gold and silver. Well, some banks were honest and some not so much. Some banks took full advantage of the lack of oversight and would print money endlessly to water down the value so people could not redeem their money for gold and silver. This brought a host of problems with currency. By 1863, there were over 1,600 banks issuing money and had 10,000 different kinds of notes. They were all different sizes and colors. Counterfeiting became a huge problem for banks. But because of the vast amount of currencies in circulation, some criminals just made up currencies for payments. Entering the Civil War, the Union needed to raise money in order to fight the rebels. For the first time, federal government began to issue its own currency. In 1861, over $60 million was placed into circulation and had no hard backing of gold or silver, but was dubbed legal tender. This currency was colloquially called greenbacks because of their green ink. People were very wary of the war-issued currency and did not believe that it would keep its value. You see why store of value is important? Congress in 1863 passed the National Currency Act and with it the creation of the national banking system. With national banks as its members, these banks would issue currency that was backed by government bonds. The government would place in rigorous banking standards on these banks, and to ensure the banks were following the rules, they would do surprise inspections. At first, very few state banks would join the system, but they were forced in 1865 when the government placed in a 10% tax on all privately issued banknotes. The banks simply could not afford the tax and joined the system out of necessity. With state banks under the control of the national banking system, the system would issue out gold and silver certificates. These were paper currencies that people could exchange for gold and silver. But the United States did not go on the gold standard until the Gold Standard Act of 1900. The gold standard tied US dollars to the amount of gold the United States held. But because paper currency was much easier to carry around than ounces or pounds of gold, people did not exchange it very often. As a result, the government would print a little more currency than the amount of gold it held. The gold standard had two major advantages. First, people felt more secure knowing that their currency was worth something other than the continent it was printed on. Second, the standard stops the government from printing too much money and controlled inflation very well. But it did have some disadvantages. The gold standard made the currency very inflexible to the growing economy and population. The scarcity of gold would be translated to the scarcity of money itself. Another risk would be if millions of people feared that the currency was losing value, they would attempt to redeem the gold and silver and empty the vaults of the federal government. And it was not just people that could empty the vaults. Federal governments could do it too. It was because of these reasons that the United States would move away from the gold standard starting in 1933. FDR would order that all citizens had to turn in their gold coins to the central bank for an exchange rate of $20.67 an ounce in Federal Reserve notes. This made the exchange for gold to increase to $35 an ounce after $35 an ounce. After World War II, countries decimated by the war would redeem their cash holdings to drain the U.S. of the gold holdings, until finally the gold standard was abandoned fully in 1971 by President Nixon. Now let's talk about the creation of the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve was created in 1913 as a response to events like the Panic of 1873. In 1873, millions of people would make bank runs, causing banks to fail. Prior to the passage of the Banking Act of 1933, if a bank failed and you did not get your money out in time, it was gone.
Money! There's something wrong. The bank won't give someone their money.
Well, I'm going to get mine. Come along, young man. Every penny in yours.
And mine too.
And give me mine, too.
Stop all payments! Stop all payments!
In 1933, the fear of bank runs during the Great Depression made Congress pass the Banking Act of 1933, creating the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation. This guarantees that if a bank fails, the U.S. government insured a certain amount of money will be redeemed. Today, the sum of money is $250,000 if a bank should fail. The reason why this is important is because when someone puts money into a bank, it is not going to a giant vault with their name on it.
Don't look now, but there's something funny going on over there at the bank, George. I've never really seen one, but that's got all the earmarks of being a run.
Now, just remember that this thing isn't as black as it appeared. I have some news for you, folks. I was just talking to old man Potter, and he's guaranteed cash payments to the bank. The bank's going to reopen next week.
But, George, I got my money here. Did he guarantee this place?
Well, no, Charlie, I didn't even ask him. We don't need Potter over here.
And I'll take mine now.
No, but you're thinking of this place all wrong, as if I had the money back in a safe. The money's not here. Well, your money's in Joe's house. That's right next to yours. And in the Kennedy house, and Mrs. Maitland's house, and 100 others. You're lending them the money to build, and then they're going to pay it back to you as best they can. Now, what are you going to do, foreclose on them?
I got $242 in here, and $242 isn't going to break anybody.
Okay, Tom. All right. Here you are. You sign this. You get your money in 60 days.
For 60 days?
Well, now, that's what you agreed to when you bought your shares,
Tom, did you get your money?
No.
Well, I did. Old man Potter will pay 50 cents on the dollar for every share you got.
50 cents on the dollar?
Yes, cash.
Well, what do you say?
No, Tom, you have to stick to your original agreement. Now, give us 60 days on this
Okay,
thing.
Randall.
Are you going to Potter's?
Banks use money placed into savings accounts to lend out to other people. This is known as the money multiplier. When a bank lends out money, it is artificially adding money to the money supply, allowing people to buy homes, start businesses, and invest. In turn, the people who receive that money also spend it until the buying power of the loan is zero. If the bank fails, all of those businesses, homes, and investors fail with it. So how do banks get money and make a profit? Most banks are corporations and sell stock to their shareholders. The money from shareholders allow the bank to be able to make investments in the form of loans, stocks, and bonds. The banks will collect interest on these investments and pay out to their shareholders. If a bank does well and pays out well, more people will want to invest in the bank. Banks also get money from certificates of deposit. These are loans from individual people to the banks. You could do that right now if you wanted to. The banks today are regulated by the Federal Reserve, which we will talk more in more detail in a later chapter. The Federal Reserve requires banks to have a reserve of money. This is the percentage of deposits that the banks take in. Let's say the Fed sets the reserve requirement to 10%. That means that if I deposit $1,000, the bank is required to take $100 and place it to the side. The bank then uses $900 to lend out or invest. The bank will lend out money until it's loaned out, meaning the bank can no longer lend money to anyone, and if the Federal Reserve increases the reserve requirements, the bank will have to find a way to get the money. Alright students, that's the end of Chapter 10. This is not everything with banking. In Chapter 16, we'll be talking about monetary policy and how it affects banking. Please make sure that you are washing your hands, don't touch your face, and do not go outside unless you need to.